Hey, it's Terry, and this is the Something Spooky review of Midsommar. Midsommar was released in 2019 by A24, and it was directed by Ari Aster, who just the year before had directed Hereditary. So Ari is quickly becoming one of the greatest horror directors of our time. Midsommar made $46 million at the box office against a budget of $9 million, and it has an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes. It was a very divisive film. You will find arguments on both sides of the spectrum. Some people hated it, and some people think it is terrific. I myself probably lean more towards the latter. I really loved the movie. I think it does fall just short of being a masterpiece. So overall, Midsommar is kind of a perversion of the flower generation. It is a dark take on a lot of hippie ideal and imagery. We've seen that in movies before, like The Wicker Man and Rosemary's Baby. It very much has the feel of one of those kind of 70s witchcraft movies where it is taking these things that are traditionally bright and colorful and making them dark and scary. It is very well made, it is expertly crafted, it is creative, and it is scary, but it is certainly not for everybody, and that is part of the problem. It is purposefully dense and obtuse. It's also very long. It's about 2.5 hours, and if you watch the director's cut, there's another half hour onto that. It's almost 3 hours, so it is intended to be this epic horror movie, but combined with its abstract way of doing horror, that's going to be a lot for some people to digest. So the whole idea revolves around, well, not the premise revolves around this idea of unceasing sunlight. Everything is very bright. There are a lot of colors. It's very vivid. It takes place in Sweden, and it plays into this idea of the midnight sun, where the sun is only down for a little bit of time, and it's this happy celebration for the people, supposedly. So everything is happening in broad daylight, and there's a lot of bright greens and other colors in the background, while some horrible stuff is happening on the screen. So it has its own identity and its own feel right there that kind of makes you feel uneasy, because you're used to seeing these things happen in shadowy, environments and dark alleys and things like that. And this is all happening in very idyllic looking, beautiful Sweden. So that plays a lot into just the general uneasiness that the film purposefully strives for, and that is basically present in every element of the film, including its characters. The characters are very complex. There are things to like about them, although none of them are fully likable. Danny, the main character played by Florence Pugh, definitely is a likable character, and you come to sympathize with her the most certainly. But all of the characters are under so much stress the whole time. There's so much tragedy from the very beginning, and they're all in such conflict with each other the whole time that you never really feel comfortable with any of them. You don't feel like you don't like them in the sense that you normally do, as much as you maybe pity them or sympathize with them. So it just makes for an interesting off the gate landing point when you can't really get your footing with any of these characters. The pre-title scene where you're getting to know these characters and some of their conflicts and problems is masterfully done. It sets the pace for the movie right away because it's immediately pretty slow and art house with opening shots of these beautiful vistas and landscapes, and it all builds towards this horrible thing that happens that sets a lot of the characters and things in the story into motion. But even that is this very abstract kind of horror. It's not what you would expect, from a fun horror movie, and it kind of immediately puts you on the defensive, and it just goes to show exactly what this movie is going to be, and it's very much of that Ari Aster Hereditary tone. So if you've seen that movie, then you kind of know what you're getting into, but if you didn't, then this pre-credit scene is going to kind of give you an idea. It sets the mood for the rest of the movie and what you can expect from the scares in the movie. After that, the conflict between Dani and her boyfriend's Christian's friends is pretty important. There's a lot of conflict between those characters, and it's part of why it's so hard to relate to any of them or start to feel comfortable with them, because they're not even comfortable with each other, and there's a lot of problems between them. So it's hard to feel invested in them as like a group of friends the way you do in a fun slasher movie or something. It's part of the overall tension of the movie. It's deliberate. It's what the filmmakers were going for, but it's not fun or pleasant in any way. I won't get too far into specifics the further we go into the movie, but I do want to talk about the scenes where they are kind of leaving this prelude scene and heading towards the festival in Sweden where most of the movie takes place, because there are some specific scenes here that I think really illustrate what you can expect from the rest of the movie that are very smart. And one of them is when they're on the plane and they're heading to Sweden, and there's this shot looking out the plane window, and it's relatively peaceful. And as it moves in, as it draws into the window, it eventually goes out the window, and you start to feel like the shake and pull of the gravity and force of the plane until the screen is basically incomprehensible. And it's, this visual cue that things are going to go very, very poorly, and that, this is not on a good course for these characters. And that continues as they're driving into the festival, the commune where most of the movie takes place. They see the road flip upside down, so they're driving in upside down. And it has this very, down the rabbit hole kind of feel. A lot of the movie has to do with hallucinogens, and there's a lot of trippy imagery and psychedelic effects. There's a very Alice in Wonderland feel to the whole movie, and this in particular is when we kind of see them tumbling down, and we know that it's not going to go well, and that they probably aren't coming back, because this is looking pretty ominous from the start. So I don't want to go into too many specifics after that. There's a long, slow build where we're just getting into the commune and kind of getting to see how weird everything is, and just wondering basically what's going on and where all this is going. And that's where I think it could really lose a lot of people. And part of the problem with this movie is, I said, for some people, its length, and it takes about an hour to get to the first real scare of the movie. And it's even then a very abstract scare. It's not what you would expect from, a fun horror movie, certainly. It's just kind of soul-shattering and dark and disturbing in the way that scares in Hereditary were. So once you see that, if you already weren't feeling, the build of this movie and weren't appreciating the kind of, artsman crafts element that was going into the scenes, you could be in trouble, because you're only an hour in and there's still an hour and a half to go. Most horror movies are only an hour and a half. Most would be 2/3 over by this point, and you are just kind of getting the first big scare. If you don't like what's happening, if you didn't like that scare, you're in trouble. And I could see how, if you aren't appreciating it, you could almost start to feel as trapped as the characters themselves, which is part of the premise of the movie, of course. They kind of get trapped into this situation, but you're trapped there with them, especially if you saw this in a theater or something for another hour and a half, whether, you're liking it or not at this point. So I could see how, if you weren't already feeling this, and then you still had that long to go, even if you didn't realize it at the time, you would end up leaving probably feeling very sour about the whole experience. So like I said, it's purposefully obtuse, it's purposefully difficult and inaccessible, and that's part of what makes the movie so tense and perplexing, but that's just not going to be for everybody. So we continue to see this in the way that the movie is presented. There's a lot of things in the movie that just don't feel right. They just look wrong, and it's hard to articulate. I've actually tried to watch the movie a few times now and tried to make more sense of it, but a lot of the images, there's just something off about them, and that's the way it's supposed to be. The content of the images, of course, the costumes or whatever it is happening on screen, I'm sure has meanings and explanations that I just maybe don't understand, couldn't find in my research. I'm sure that there are things there. I'm not, it's not just all made up. But I don't think it's really important that you know what those things mean. They are meant to just look unnatural and strike you wrong and just be upsetting to you, and they are effective in that way. But also just in a more building block mentality, the way the images are presented. There's a lot of things that are in like the shapes and angles of things that I think just look wrong to us naturally in a symmetrical level. And the filmmakers were, of course, aware of this, and that's what they were striving for. So if you can appreciate that kind of thing, there is a lot to look for here. And that's emphasized with camera movement. I won't go into too many examples, but some of the ones are like the way the feast tables, if you've seen the movie, like where they all eat, the way those are arranged. There is something in the geometry of that which just does not sit right with me, and I think a lot of people, and I think it's not supposed to, and I think you can tell that by the way the camera is moving through it. And it makes you look at it, it makes it uneasy. Or the big pyramid that rises, and you get the point with the rolling mountains in the background, and there are some other things in that images that they just don't seem to line up together, and there's just something in your brain that kind of misfires when you see them. And so, that's the intention of the filmmaker, but it's another way that the movie is just not very pleasant. It's not meant to be. And if you aren't able to appreciate those things, then it's probably all just kind of lost on you, and you're just feeling like it's a very long movie where not much is happening, and you aren't liking what you're looking at, and you may not even be sure why. So overall, I think Midsommar, is a film that is meant to be studied. It is very much cinephile horror. It is, something that is meant to be actively watched and kind of dug into. It's not really anything that's going to be fun to watch with a group of friends like a horror movie sometimes is. So it depends on what you're, looking for. I think that works for and against the movie. I really appreciated it. I love Midsommar. I think it's expertly done. I do think, like I said, it just misfires in a few ways, but I can see how other people would not like it at all. Because if this is not what you're invested in, then it is just beating you over the head with it the whole time. And if you aren't getting it, it's not going to help you get it in any way. So I love Midsommar. I do think it falls just short of being that kind of masterpiece, which is able to, kind of transcend that barrier and present things in an artful, thoughtful way, but also make it accessible and entertaining for people. I think this leans more towards being academic horror, but I'm going to give Midsommar an A-. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it, share it, and remember to follow Something Spooky. Thanks.